Now, let's move on and get more of the day's news, because this actually is a really nice story. It wasn't a nice story to begin with, but a St Helens councillor has been speaking about being rescued from a capsized boat when she was just 4 years old and has praised the volunteer lifeboat crews who saved her. Jeanie Bell and her older sister were staying with family friends when the accident happened while they were staying in Scotland in the early 1980s. She says it's been brought back to her this week after a row over how the RNLI funds life-saving projects overseas. She's been speaking to our reporter, Cllr Hamilton.
I remember my sister's voice reassuring me, keeping me close. We were really cold because it was about half an hour. And I remember those kind of almost like washed away images that I can't quite grasp onto. But I know from talking to my sister, she remembers an awful lot of it. And she was 11, so it's much more vivid to her, and it would have been much more terrifying. I was just a little girl holding on to her sister and hoping that we'd get rescued. She knew the danger that we were in, and it was very, very cold. It was dark. We were shivering. She held on to me tight, really, really held on to me tight, and kept my head above the water, because all the cabins are not very high, so it was enough for her to be able to stand up, but I couldn't. I was too little. So she was holding on to me for dear life to keep my head above the waterline, and she did it for over half an hour, which for an 11-year-old is incredible.
Eventually you were rescued. Tell us about that.
Because it was quite far into the middle of nowhere, really. It wasn't near anything. There was a road that went past, but it wasn't used very often. My dad and Bob were they were in the water trying to hold the boat and get the boat. And a gentleman passed by in a car and spotted us, and he raised the alarm. And we ended up with Coast Guards, fire service, half the community out, doing anything to try and help us. But the problem that we had was every time they tried to open the door, water would rush in and it would reduce the air pocket. So the boat had to be dragged to the edge before they could they all kind of got together in a group and span the boat round. We had to hold our breath. And they span the boat round, opened the doors simultaneously and dragged us out before the boat sank.
Very, very dramatic. And your dad, presumably, was he watching this because he had fallen out of the boat originally?
Yeah, he was on the side watching. I can't imagine what it must have been like. And my mum had arrived at that point, and obviously she was absolutely distraught. And it must have been so frightening for them to watch it all happening, not knowing, you know, if we were going to get out, if we were going to be okay. I think some of the big worry was when the boat was being swished around, would we swallow water? What would the impact of that be? But we were fine. We spent a little bit of time in hospital. They checked us out and we were okay. But without the Coast Guards and without the lifeboats and without the fire service and those passers-by, we wouldn't be here.
You made front page news across the country, and your nan saved the newspaper. So just... You've got them all here.
Yeah, we've got we've got the Daily Express, the Daily Star, we've got the Telegraph somewhere. Yeah, my nan saved them all, and what was quite awful for our family that were living in England at the time was that it was this front page news was the first time they saw what had happened, because we'd gone straight to hospital and we'd been looked after by the hospital, and then lo and behold, we're all over the news the next day. And yeah, it was a real shock for them too.
And some of the headlines here in the Daily Star, saved from sea tomb is the headline across the whole paper. Scott's sisters in boat terror. And is that that's you, 4-year-old Jeanie, carried to safety? Yeah,
that's me. And that's my sister Kerry. And there's quite a few. That's an action shot there. That's my dad, who'd conveniently stripped down to his underwear to try and save us. I'm not quite sure why I thought that would help, but
even colder.
And that's the point where they dragged the boat to the side. You can see the lifeboats there, and all the volunteers trying to get us out.
I mean, it's an incredible story. Like you say, it's maybe not something you've talked a lot about, but with the RNLI being in the news this week, it brought it all back to you.
Yeah, it did. It's something that happened a very, very long time ago, and I don't know why we don't really talk about it as a family. It's just something that happened, and you don't dwell on it. But when I saw the news headlines this week, and I saw some of the reaction on Twitter, and people saying that they would cancel their membership and that they wouldn't support them, and it it just really, it made me really, really sad, because I just think no matter where a life is saved, it's a life saved. And it doesn't matter whether that human life is in Scotland or whether it's halfway across the world, you know, it's people, and that's what the concern should be. So it does horrify me slightly when I see things like that, because the RNLI do amazing work, and they do amazing work all over the world, and I'm proud that they do amazing work all over the world, actually. You know, it's a British charity that's out there representing our country and helping people everywhere. So, yeah, I was fairly horrified this week.
Jeanie Bell there, with incredible memories of being just 4 years old and what the RNLI means to her. The time is